Moving to the second keynote address for the day, we have Dr. Michael Preuss, Head of Communications, Bayer. He has been the Head of Communications at Bayer AG since May 2016. This includes corporate and divisional, external, internal, and digital communications, as well as responsibilities for the Bayer brand, sports and culture, as well as heritage communications. Dr. Preuss joined Bayer in 1998 as a communications coordinator and spokesperson for North America. In 2002, he moved to the Material Science Division as Head of Corporate Policy and Media Relations. From 2005, he worked as Head of Press and PR at Bosch before taking over the Corporate Policy and Press Department at Bayer in 2008. He studied German language and literature, political and media science at the Heinrich Heine University in Dusseldorf. In 2001, already in Bayer service, he did his doctorate in the German language and literature. He's flown all the way from Germany just to be with us at WPRF and return to the headquarters later tonight. Special thanks to Rachna Panda for making this happen. May we please have Dr. Preuss on stage for his address on how the world is changing PR and how PR should change the world. Joining him on stage just after his address would be Aseem Sood, Chairperson at AMEC, CEO at Impact Research and Measurement. So over to you. Earlier, Tuhina Pandey, Marketing and Communications Director, IBM India and South Asia, was to join Dr. Preuss, but due to health reasons, she was unable to join in. But thank you, Aseem, for agreeing to do this, and it's over to you. Dr. Preuss, stage is all yours.
Well, many thanks for the kind introduction. Namaste. You heard I learned or studied German language and literature, so guten Tag in German as well. Thank you very much for being here and for being able to also address you. Yeah, the title is How the World is Changing PR and How PR Should Change the World. And if we really do have the power to change the world as communicators, that is quite a big job that we all have ahead of us. I truly believe we have, and I truly also believe in this world that we're actually living in here right now. And I try to obtain a global perspective today. There couldn't be a better job right now than working in the PR and communications arena, because I truly am very passionate about that we can truly shape the world around us. And I think that is very important. It is also important because what I personally like a lot is the motto that had been chosen by the G20 presidency in India, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is then one earth, one family, and one future. And if that's kind of the direction the G20 is taking, and then you refer this to what does it actually mean for the companies to also attribute to this, there's a lot we can actually shape as we move forward. And if I look at the word PR for me is not just public relations. For me, the direct translation of PR is presence and relevance. And that's kind of the theme that I would also like to portray how we try to look at things in our company. So we also heard a little earlier VUCA world. We're all familiar with this expression, of course, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's interesting because that expression already exists since the late 1980s. And if that already is since the late 1980s, some economists suggest right now to actually call this right now what we see in the world, a Barney world. And that world is coming more from a volatile environment into a brittle. And people feeling not comfortable and uncomfortable and uncertain of being anxious. Things are getting not only more complex, they become nonlinear. And what used to be ambiguous is now becoming more and more incomprehensible. So we're seeing kind of a 2.0 version of the VUCA world that we're all living in. And of course, there are a lot of interdependencies on things that are happening on a global scale. And if you look at this, what are those big topics that are right now on a global scale being debated? It's still the consequences of a pandemic. And we still feel the bubbling effects in some areas of the world. We're even talking about the next pandemic phases and what that means for us. It's geopolitical tensions, political turmoils, including wars in the world. Climate change, extreme weather that also have an effect on the global food crisis. Inflation, recession fears. I talk to colleagues in my network in the world that actually have 100% and even more inflation rates. That's quite dramatic. And energy shortage and cost of living. I'm in the Germany center of Europe. I can tell you energy shortage right now is very high on our agenda. And of course, we see all those topics, we see all those issues, but the good news is that at this point in time, people are looking in this uncertainty, in this vulnerability that we all feel. They're looking for reliable, and they're also looking for trusted partners that actually help them to address those challenges. And that is a big contribution that all of us can make if we closely align ourselves basically to those trends that we see. And especially if you look also at the pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic, I'm also representing parts of the pharmaceutical industry. We have seen that also that was a booster in how the pharmaceutical industry was seen in order to make contributions to help fighting a global pandemic. So it's really important. People are looking for reliable partners around the globe. Now, basically, if we look at those global trends right now, which are disruptive, which are being debated on a global scale with global leaders, then of course they also find influence on the global debates. And we have tracked some global data. If you look at online media, if you look at social media, topics like health, sustainability, climate change, digitalization, they take absolute center stage right now. And this is kind of a direct consequence of those trends that we're seeing. But of course, there's also more to it, including topics of security, just talked about diversity, inclusion, equity, education, knowledge is important, new ways of working. So those are, on a global scale, the topics that actually exist. And the question, of course, for every corporation that is seeing this is, how do we best align into those conversations? So if these are the core topics, and if these are the conversations based on the core topics that are happening, how do I best align to this? Because quite frankly, if you look at the media, this is what most of the media is actually going to focus. This is where most of the conversations are. So if you're not playing in this field, you to a certain degree become irrelevant. And getting this relevance, presence and relevance, PR, getting this relevance is going to be super important. And it starts with really knowing what you do as a company and what contributions you can actually make here. I'm representing a company. I'm one of 100,000 people around the globe. And we have 3 businesses, one in agriculture, one in pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs, and OTC, non-prescription drugs. 50 billion of sales and more than 6 billion of R&D, which is quite important. And basically what we're doing is we're serving the most fundamental human needs of health and nutrition. Something that is super important for every organization is also to be very clear, what are we standing for? What's the mission? And the mission is and needs to be so much more than just a slogan. It needs to be something that a corporation is breathing every day. And what makes me proud is when we ask our employees in our employee surveys, what is it? Why do you like to work for Bayer? And then we get the answer of our mission. Then you know that there's a connectivity between the communications work and the positioning and what the company does and what employees feel. In our case, that mission statement is health for all, hunger for none, which is very bullish, and it's something that our company, of course, alone can never accomplish. But it's something that inspires the organization and where we rally behind a greater cause. There's a second element, which is also super important, because health for all, hunger for none is almost a direct translation of 2 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that is goal number 2, which is zero hunger, and goal number 3, good health and well-being. Connecting your mission to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is something which is extremely powerful if you can make this claim and if you're using this. And that kind of puts a lot of energy into the organization as well. So coming back to what are the topics that matter on a global scale and that leaders around the globe are discussing, what are the conversations that are taking place, one of the most important things you can do as a corporation is, what are the topics that we can contribute here? And it sounds marginal, but that exercise is super important as you really want to know what are those things where you can make the biggest and greatest impact. In our case, our contributions to food security, for example, the access to health and nutrition, or also fighting climate change. There are a couple of others, but for us, it's really important that we do want to make that connection to the relevancy of the conversations that are actually going on. And what's also happening, as we look at some of the data from the Edelman Trust Barometer, is that businesses right now, and these are global numbers, actually are very trusted. So business is even the most trusted institution right now on a global scale. I'm aware there are differences, of course, in the world, on which country might look at a little bit differently. But 62% would really trust businesses, and that's higher than on a global scale, NGOs, media, or even the government. 63% even say that they would buy or advocate for brands based on their beliefs and values, so with a direct business impact. So when they say, I sign up to actually what your beliefs and values are, I'm really obliged to actually buy the product, which is a direct business impact. And also 69% say that having a societal impact is a strong expectation or deal breaker when considering a job. So the future talents that we actually need to tap into is important to say they really are with us, the majority, and they would really want to do, not to waste their time in jobs that are not actually fulfilling their needs. They want to work for a purpose. And there's also an expectations for business, of course, to do even more when we talk about sustainability. What it all comes down to basically is, I think, the very classical but also known triangle of sustainability. It's about the people, the planet, the profits, so about the responsibility we have for people, the environmental targets and footprint, but also the business side of it. And I say this, and this is, again, a simple chart, but I say this because I do believe it's very important that we in communications play a very important role as we shape those targets and as we shape sustainability. But I also do believe that when it comes to executing on this, communication is not the best owner. It needs to be deeply embedded into the business. It needs to be part of their strategies. It needs to be part of their P&Ls. And you can even go one step further. It needs to be part of the remuneration. If that is not deeply ingrained in what you're doing, and if that's not deeply ingrained in the business, it becomes a campaign. It becomes something that you can communicate, but it's nothing that actually people would see you're really living up to this, and you're not earning, also as a consequence, the trust as a corporation moving forward. So that triangle, and again, it needs to be in the business while communication plays a super important role, is important. I just wanted to give you a few examples on how we translate this into the company and how we live our sustainability commitments, because we have defined some targets until 2030, and we are very specific about them. So if you would ask, now what's the communication agenda? The communication agenda is what we actually line up with our sustainability targets. And without going into detail on them, but we're going to be very specific about what they are, it's about achieving climate neutrality if we look at the reduced ecological footprint, for example, by 2030, but also to reduce the environmental impact of our crop protection products by minus 30% still then. What's important, that all those targets are measurable. You see this logo of the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So there need to be very clear science evidence-based results that you can also track your progress in order to make sure you accomplish this. We do the same when it comes to inclusive growth. And for example, what we want to do in our companies until 2030, support 100 million smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries, support 100 million people in underserved communities with self-care, and also to fulfill the need of 100 million women in low and middle income countries for modern contraception. You see a little asterisk on the side, and the little asterisk that I showed before, but also here, sometimes good to see the footnotes. But the footnote just indicates that all of those targets are targets where our senior management, including the board of management, is being measured against. So that's part of their remuneration package. Not accomplishing those targets means less money for senior management. I'm deeply convinced only then you can really make a change in a company and drive progress when it comes to sustainability. And when we look at this, and if we do it right, and if we say this is the cornerstone of what the businesses do, it of course also has a great impact on reputation. Because if I look at the reputational drivers of any company, these are basically the key ones. Workplace and environment, social responsibility, products and services, the vision and leadership, financial performance, and also the emotional appeal. So for everyone doing corporate branding and design, emotional appeal really, really counts as well. But the others are very closely tied, basically, to the sustainability efforts that any company is doing. And what we also see is, of course, they're correlating with each other. There's a lot of correlation between those elements that build a reputation, and especially if you look at this, social responsibility and financial performance. There's latest research that indicates that this especially is a reputation driver. And we just heard also doing good is doing good for the business. I can only underline this, because that's where the magic happens between doing good and doing good for the business. And that's why that is so important. And I think we should also make sure that we continue to remind not just ourselves and our teams, but also our board members, the people that we're dealing with, why what we do is important and why it matters, because a strong reputation, as we all know, is more than nice to have. It creates a lot of value, it drives business, and it drives brand value. So we at Bayer, for instance, have a brand value of more than $5 billion US, measured by brand finance. We think there's even more to it. But having a strong reputation with the benefits of doing better financially, being attractive for investors, being better for stakeholder relationships that we have, is a competitive advantage that is very important. You heard me saying PR, for me, the translation is presence and relevance, but only when your company truly does what it says and says what it does, sometimes pretty easy, and truly feels passionate about it. Only then you can also lead a conversation and you can have a seat at the table. My colleague Rachna, who's also here in the room, our head of communications and public affairs in India, she was participating in B20 task forces that were actually formed, because of course there's a great contribution the company can do, and also this, I think, is a token of appreciation and influence, and also a way how we can basically bring in our knowledge and our support. And I just want to say that everything, of course, that you do as you go this route starts with, listening capabilities. I said this at the beginning. What are the conversations that are going on? What's really important? Just today, we issued our first farmer voice survey in 8 countries with 800 interviews and also 2,000 smallholder interviews that were actually included here. And the good news is that 82% of those smallholders actually feel positive or very positive about the future of farming. But of course, they also see that there are a couple of issues that need to be tackled, including climate change, and they are looking for various measures of risk mitigation and the access to technologies to secure their livelihood. There's much more data to it, which is available on our website. Again, we just issued this today. But for now, it's just important to say these regular check-ins, see what really matters for our stakeholders, continues to be extremely important. Something I would also say, if you're on the journey and if you really say, how can I get access to products? How can I do good and combine our responsibility also with our business success? There's a nice initiative of the Better Life Farming Centers that we actually established back in 2018 here in India. And it's kind of a self-sustaining ecosystem for smallholder farmers. And what's good about it is that right now we have 2,500 of them, but in 7 countries. So started in India and was really important in order to be exported to more countries. Something where, by the way, also communication played a strong role, because you can have something and have a nucleus where you start, and then you start scaling. And that is part of the communication work in order to basically scale this throughout the country and even beyond. And there are, of course, other initiatives that are happening and that we are driving. The Nutrient Gap Initiative, for example, which is very important, where it's about vitamins and micronutritionals that we're supporting in the rural area. And also that we have a network of telemedicine centers in the country where we give access to healthcare advice. So it is a full range of things that you do once you're totally on board on sustainability with people, planet, profit. All of the 3 facets are in it. And once you do this credibly in a company, you can actually accomplish a lot. And I would just want to show you a quick film right now, how we at Bayer see this, what our contributions is to health for all, hunger for none. But I think, and I want to leave you with the thought that, you know, how we in PR could also change the world by communicating, driving those initiatives and sustainability are extremely important. We have to know what the key conversations are that are happening on a global level. We have to know what people are talking about. We have to find our sweet spot between what we find important and what our audience finds important. And then we have to credibly make sure that this is being embedded in the organization and with our employees. And only then, I think, you can also have doing good and also doing good in terms of business and have that combination. So I'd like to quickly show you the film, and then we have a little talk about it.
Born with it, that desire for better. It could be a better morning coffee, a better job, car, or home. But sometimes it's not just about us, it's about our loved ones too. At Bayer, it's this desire for better that drives us. Through the power of science, we strive for a world where health is for all and hunger is for none. A world where we can win the fight against life-threatening diseases, where we can take control of our everyday health, and where feeding the planet looks after the planet, giving everyone a chance for a better life. This is a world we'd be proud to pass on. Bayer.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Preuss, for this wonderful presentation. In your presentation, you talked about how the world is changing the way we do public relations or communication. You also talked about how it's very important to listen to what's happening in different parts of the world and identify those topics and trends. In the examples that you gave us, those examples were not directly related to the business that you're in. While we can always argue that in the long run, they will have an impact on the business. And you lead the function of communication. So how do you convince the senior management to put in their resources and get a buy-in on what should we prioritize? And once you do that priority identification, is it just the communication team that is working on it? Or who is delivering all these programs?
I think that's a very fundamental question because every company that needs to shape the way forward and the role of the communications people, I think we need to be, not just only advisors for the CEO, we need to have that seat at the table. So just to be a communication team that is fulfilling the request of senior managers, for me, would not be enough. So there need to be a constant discussion about, also in the board of management, what those trends are, and that is something that we, with communication, can provide a lot of insights on, and talk to the business about those trends that we see, because it's important as it shapes our environment that we're actually working on. So we have to have that seat at the table, and not just trying to convince, but form this actually in a team. And if I talk about a team, it is not about who comes up with a great idea or a smart idea. For us, it's totally irrelevant. It can be somebody from HR, can be somebody from a business, can be somebody from procurement. People have a lot of great idea and people feel very passionate about, especially when we talk about sustainability, and they feel empowered to actually make a change. Then the question is, okay, how can we best deliver on this? Putting a team in place where communication is part of it, but it also needs to be deeply ingrained and embedded, as I said, into the business at a quick scale, and creating those results is extremely important. But it starts with the transparency, and it starts with creating a team that is able to quickly deliver on those results, which have been clearly defined. And I can tell you, sustainability commitments, they are not being created overnight. There have been very thorough discussions in our board of management, and there's a commitment, even a board resolution, to say we want to be an impact generator. And if we want to be an impact generator in the industries that we're in, then we have to act like this, and that comes with a consequence. So that's your entry card where they can actually operate on.
All right. And when you say the world is changing the way we do PR or comms, and you operate in several sectors, pharmaceutical, agriculture, consumer products, is there a particular sector wherein you felt the need to change communication more than the other sectors because of these changes in the world?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is right now you have two big topics, and people thought that something like health and food is something you can, in many parts of the world at least, take almost for granted. Nobody thought really about healthcare and why it really matters, or access to food. And again, I'm not talking about particular countries, but in the world it became not just a center stage topic. We have seen with the pandemic that made a lot of people rethink about their own health and what that actually means, also in terms of self-care, by the way. And we have seen also a lot of pressure on harvest. So the food security topic has become center stage. It's interesting, you see The Economist, for example, several months ago with a cover on food security. That didn't happen so often. So when those topics actually become a center topic, and that's part of your own ID and your own identity as a company, then the question is, how can you best relate to this, and how can you be part of these conversations and shape that? So to a certain degree, events outside around us have propelled the discussion, and then you need to be ready in order to be part of it.
So before this session, I had a 1 hour long chat with him, and one thing I noticed, because a lot of times we get a chance to talk to communicators that we work with as clients, and every time we ask them about their objectives, they are very clear about what the communication objectives are. And then we ask them about what business objectives are you supporting, and that's where at times we feel some people have a challenge. And in that entire 1 hour, I noticed talking to you, you were always focused on the business objectives. And every time I tried to ask you about the comms objectives or how you connected those business objectives to comm objectives, you said, no, the business objectives are what we're working on. So tell us more about that.
Well, I think they are the centerpiece. I mean, again, if you're combining basically, doing good by doing good and say, that's what we want to do, and I showed you the sustainability objectives that we have, why should I have different objectives in communications? We're going to make progress along the way. It's important that we take our employees with us because they play a central part to make that happen. We're going to engage in conversations around us with stakeholders in order to make it happen, because many of those sustainability targets is nothing that we can do alone, but we need to work in partnerships. It is something which is also interesting where you see a stronger interest right now in the public, in the media. I can tell you years ago, you talked about sustainability and there were probably 4 journalists in the room, which was pretty frustrating. That has changed. That has really changed. The interest is greater, but of course people are looking for that credible approaches that are happening, but I'm not separating between business objectives and then the communications objectives. I make them more specific, I translate them, and I want to make sure that what does that mean for employee communications? What does that mean for media communication? What does it mean in social media? What does it mean in other stakeholder interactions that we have? So I make them more specific, but the objectives and the timeline we have set ourselves, they're actually going to be the same. And I think everything you do which does not align with the business, also you go to the senior management, they say, what funny things are you guys doing? Yeah, you're not really aligned to what we're up to. I think that connects is extremely important.
And could you give us an example of how you worked on a campaign like that and then probably measured the impact of the campaign?
So one example is, I mean, one of the big things right now that we see is water, conservation of water, being mindful about how you actually treat water, especially in agriculture. Take, for example, rice production. Water is a big topic. And you can do this a lot in theory. Also, people do not really relate and don't have a lot of interaction. In this country, that's different. I know this. But in many countries, agriculture is not the center stage of what people actually know. So we teamed up with a marathon runner and an activist, Mina Guli, who was basically at 200 locations around the world running marathons and engaging people in this in order to make people aware how important water actually is. We supported this. We involved our country organizations and networks, and it was all to spark that conversation that was necessary. It was not about saying that is our commitment, our own commitment. But if something like this happens in countries, you're totally surprised how many people actually joining the movement. And that was exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to support it. And it's just one measure, very global, 200 sites around the globe, almost a year, that activity. And it became out to be extremely powerful. But if I measure the conversations we had, the media output we got, the social media we mentioned, and the employee engagement, super important, because we were also able to talk to our own employees what we actually do in this arena. And all of this together, I think that's the right measure in order to ladder up to our overall sustainability commitments.
All right, thank you. And another thing you talked about, which will be of importance to everybody in this room, is you said public relations can change the world. Give us some examples.
Well, it can change the world because we had so many examples where you basically put out in, here's our objectives, here's what we're going to do, here's what we specifically to deliver. Take the smallholder farming examples that I set and the centers that we built. If you communicate about this internally, people take note in other countries. They're basically also up for creating those centers and giving more access. The same in the pandemic. I can tell you that people were empowered to actually act quickly and contribute something in order to fight the pandemic. It was, for example, in India, we have plants, we have oxygen at those plants. How does this oxygen actually come to some of the hospitals? Or we have laboratories in our pharmaceutical division where in the early days there was no COVID tests available. We could do PCR tests. They were never meant for COVID, but they could have been converted. And people who were working in the lab, because only they knew, quite frankly, they came and say, I have a smart idea, maybe we can do something here. And they were empowered to actually help and give this to the governments in order then to have PCR testing ready right at the beginning. Now we communicated about this externally, but also internally. Started in Germany, and we had several other countries where we had the same labs. And people said, oh, we have the same labs, can't we just do something? I don't know how many lives were saved by having early PCR testing in these days. I'm sure there were plenty of them, quite frankly. But that's what I mean, like, if we're smart in using these examples, if we inspire others with what we do, make them think about it, partner up, doing the right things, empower people, then I think we in communication also have, even for companies, have really the power to change the world. It needs to be coming from the heart of the company. It cannot be a campaign that is disrelated to what the company does. But if that is in line, then we can really help to get the word out and change the world.
But help us connect the dots, because on one side we're saying there were labs in Germany which were not meant to be centers wherein you could do testing for COVID, but finally you were able to save lives in many countries. Now tell us, what role did communications team play in this journey?
Well, by just internally communicating, we had several other countries, including the US, Brazil, where we operate similar plans because we always have the same labs in those countries. And they said, hey, we have the same. Can we just also make use of them? Can we just also give them to us? So that's what I meant. Just simple terms of internal communications. People read it because there was a high interest in the topic. What are you doing? They were inspired by this and they felt empowered because it was not the board of management, the CEO tells you what to do and makes a decision which takes 2.5 weeks when the board meets the next time. They were empowered to actually do this. And that speed, the transparency that we can actually help to contribute, and also the pride that people feel that people do this, they came up with all sorts of ideas what can be done. Voluntary services, being out there helping, this is something that we wanted to also support, and we gave people the room to actually do that.
So if a company wanted to create an environment like that, and a comms team which is sitting in this room here wanted to create an environment like that, how much time do you think it takes?
You mean environment in terms of shaping?
Creating an environment wherein employees bring up these ideas and you have a system which pulls out these ideas, takes them to the CEO, and then you are able to save lives.
It is a question of culture, and I said early on, we had a global crisis team, so some of the major decisions had to be made from top. We were also present in the countries and at our sites, and very early it was clear that you cannot ladder up all those decisions up to the top. So it's the one call to say, guys, you are empowered, and we mean it like this, because people who are working on the project, they had other jobs to do, yeah, but they were 100% working on this project, and it was okay. So not that their supervisors come and say, wait a second, what are you doing? No, they were empowered actually to do this. It's a question of culture, I have to say, of course. In order to allow this, you also need to prove it, that people can do it. But when we, for example, internally made sure that we told the story of this one, researcher in our lab who came up with the idea and feeling empowered, that went a long way. And that was also kind of something where people said, hey, if this person is empowered and can do it, I can do it as well. So it was a rippling effect that we actually created here.
All right. And my last question is, which is that one or more topics, global topics, which you think are going to change public relations in the next 6 months?
Well, I think it's, the topics that I presented right at the beginning, I think they're definitely going to be the ones that are here to stay. I do not see that actually they're going to be totally different. I mean, we see a lot of stories about weather extremes and climate change. So I think that is definitely one of the biggest topics that we continue to see. We're also going to continue to see geopolitical tensions that have an effect on also what's happening in the world. I think that's something where everybody also needs to see what that means, which also doesn't come without a conflict if you're operating on a global level. I think that's also important because different countries might have very different perspective on topics that are being discussed there. And health is actually an evergreen. People are, after the COVID pandemic, much more conscious about what that actually means and what they can do for their own health. So I think that's fundamental human needs, which in many parts of the world were a given, they become much more, in this Barney world that we see, they become much more relevant. And that's where I see what is on the top agenda also in the years to come.
Thank you. And I can see that you've already prioritized these topics and are working on these, so congratulations for that. And thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Aseem.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Preuss and Aseem, for offering us those fresh perspectives on the first sub-theme of WPRF 2023, connecting the dots of purpose, communication, reputation, and doing good, the benefits of investing in a strong reputation, the interconnectedness of transparency, results, and sustainability commitments, and of course, the interplay of culture, some deep insights on how business objectives link back to communications objectives. What a truly enriching conversation that. I wish to remind all of you of the race for the highest number of tweets. The Twitterati in this house seem to be slightly disappointing today. Let's warm that up and let's get more tweets coming and going. So remember, it's on, so let's pick up the pace.